Imagine you've built heaven on earth. Poverty is gone, everyone is perfectly equal, all the resources are shared, and the community lives in just total harmony.
Right, the ultimate dream.
Exactly. And then uh, you watch the whole thing slowly burn to the ground, not because of an invading army, not because of a famine or like a natural disaster, but simply because a few people decided to sleep in.
It sounds absurd when you put it like that.
Right. But think about it. Have you ever felt a pang of guilt about hitting the snooze button on your alarm clock? What if that totally common, mundane urge to just a little more rest wasn't a minor personal flaw, but the exact reason utopian societies historically collapse?
It is a completely different way of looking at human behavior. I mean, in our modern lives, we usually treat taking a break as a biological necessity or, maybe a slight harmless indulgence.
Yeah, self-care, basically.
Exactly, self-care. But the perspective we are exploring today flips that entirely on its head, treating that basic desire for rest as a literal existential threat to humanity's highest ideals.
Which brings us to our topic. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a singular, highly specific, and honestly mind-bending source today. It's an essay written back in 2008 by an author named Xu Feng.
Yeah, it lays out a comprehensive framework for a utopian community called the home without marriage and family.
And our mission in this deep dive is to understand this community's intense worldview. Specifically, we're going to look at why it defines a common human trait, like laziness, not merely as a bad habit, but as a terminal societal disease, and how they believe a collective dream can only survive through an absolute merciless life and death struggle against it.
The stakes could not possibly be higher in this text. I mean, we aren't talking about productivity hacks or how to manage your calendar better here. This is a blueprint for societal survival versus total annihilation.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand the incredibly strict rules of this community, we first have to understand the specific historical problem the author's trying to solve, right? And we also need to understand the environment he's building. The community is called the Home Without Marriage and Family, and its members are referred to as Chanyuan Celestials.
A very specific title.
Very. But first off, why no marriage and family? Like, what does that have to do with building a utopia?
What's fascinating here is how the author connects social structures to human motivation.
Ah.
Think about a traditional family unit. It inherently creates a micro-faction within a society.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if you have a spouse and children, your ultimate loyalty and your hardest labor will naturally go to them, not to the broader community.
Right, you're going to prioritize your own kids over someone else's.
Exactly. So to build a true undivided utopia, what they call the second home, Xu Feng's framework requires abolishing the traditional family entirely. That way, every ounce of love, energy, and labor is directed solely at the collective.
Wow, so everyone is essentially married to the community itself.
Precise.
That context makes this next part make so much more sense. Because if your ultimate loyalty is to the entire group, then slacking off takes on a much darker tone.
Yeah, it's not just being lazy, it's betrayal.
Right. Xu Feng actually writes that he browsed the reasons for the final failure of ideal communities throughout history. And the common denominator he found wasn't external pressure, it was internal decay. It was people seeking enjoyment, reaping the fruits of others' labor, and just drifting along. He says that as time passes under those conditions, the building of the ideal homeland just organically collapses. It's like watching people stop doing their dishes in a group house until the whole thing falls apart.
That's a great analogy. The ultimate killer of paradises isn't a lack of resources, it's laziness. So to ensure this new community actually flourishes, they have to establish baseline expectations that aggressively counter this historical trend.
And these expectations are like intense.
Oh, absolutely. They are woven into the very fabric of their daily existence. To prevent the collapse of their second home, a Chanyuan Celestial's routine is rigorously defined. They must rise on hearing the crow of a rooster.
So literally at the crack of dawn.
Literally at dawn. They have to get up to clean the courtyard and practice with their labor tools. It is a daily, relentless commitment to diligence.
But hold on, isn't rest required for long-term productivity? I mean, if you treat every moment of downtime like it's radioactive, don't people just burn out and become useless anyway?
You would think so.
How does Xu Feng reconcile the actual biological need for rest with this militant demand for diligence?
That is the core tension here. The author bridges that gap by elevating diligence from a physical task to a moral and spiritual imperative.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the text explicitly says, diligence symbolizes beauty. and laziness represents ugliness. Diligence isn't just about getting chores done, it is the vital energy that sustains the utopia.
So it's almost religious.
Very much so. They lean on proverbs like God helps those who help themselves, and they assert that natural law actively punishes the lazy and heaven will abandon them.
Wow.
In this worldview, biological fatigue is almost viewed as a temptation you have to overcome through spiritual willpower. Because if you give in, you corrode not just your physical body, but your mind, your spirit, and the entire community.
Which brings us to how they actually spot this threat. If laziness is the ultimate enemy, it requires a highly specific diagnosis so members know exactly what they are fighting.
And the diagnosis is brutally specific.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the language Shu Yifeng uses here is jarring. I want to push back on the premise for a second because is taking a day off, playing a game, or sleeping in a little bit really an existential threat to a whole society?
He certainly thinks so.
He literally compares laziness to AIDS, to cancer, to viral dysentery, to robbers, and to a devil. By categorizing laziness alongside deadly viruses, he is intentionally stripping away any innocence from the act of resting.
The language is meant to shock because it serves a very specific diagnostic purpose. Laziness isn't an event, you see, it's a behavioral sink. And Shufang outlines this fascinating downward psychological progression.
Right, the 4 stages.
Yes. He says it starts when an ordinary man becomes a complaining man. That complaining man then becomes a painful man. And finally, the painful man becomes a misfortune man, and that misfortune man is the lazy man.
I really want to dig into that causality. Why does complaining automatically lead to pain and misfortune?
It is about how your mindset rewires your reality. When you start complaining, you adopt a victim mentality. You are telling yourself that the external world is responsible for your situation.
You lose your agency.
Exactly. That psychological shift removes your agency, which creates a deep internal friction, what Shufang calls the painful man. Once you're in that painful state, you stop trying. You stop contributing.
And in a community where survival requires everyone's labor.
Right. When you stop contributing, you manifest actual physical misfortune. You become the lazy man. The progression is entirely psychological before it becomes behavioral.
That is a brilliant breakdown. And to catch people sliding down that slippery slope, the author lays out 8 very specific features to diagnose this virus.
The symptoms, essentially.
Yeah. And instead of just listing them out, let's look at how they track the progression of the disease. It seems to start with the physical routine. Staying up late at night and getting up late in the morning, waking up in a weary state with no regular schedule.
Which obviously directly violates their baseline rule of rising with the rooster.
Right.
The physical indiscipline is the first crack in the dam. From there, it infects your attitude toward your own development. The text identifies fearing hardship and fatigue as key symptoms.
Yeah, and it also targets unstructured leisure, right? Like indulging in games and wasting time just muddling along.
Yes, muddling along. In this community, unstructured free time isn't a reward, it is a breeding ground for the virus.
And from there, it seems to mutate into outright parasitism. This is where it gets really destructive for the collective. The text warns against seeking ease and comfort, and preferring to reap the fruits of others' labor. They call it eating the bread of idleness.
I am so glad you brought up the bread of idleness. Think about the neurological rewiring that happens when you consume without contributing.
Like getting a reward for doing nothing.
Exactly. If you eat bread that you didn't bake, your brain learns that effort is completely divorced from reward. You get the dopamine of the meal without the friction of the labor. Over time, that rewires a person to constantly seek shortcuts.
That makes total sense.
It creates a physical deterioration, too. Xu Weifeng describes people becoming greedy about eating, sleeping, and playing, leading to what he calls a confusing head and 4 lazy limbs.
A confusing head and 4 lazy limbs.
Yeah.
That visceral imagery really drives home the idea of rot. But the final symptom, the terminal stage of the virus, is how it affects the group dynamic.
The complaining.
Yes. The text calls out the person who never participates personally, lacks self-criticism, and instead prefers complaining and criticizing the industrious people. Like, I want you to think about a group project you've been a part of, maybe at work, maybe in school.
We have all encountered that person.
Right. The person who did all the complaining, criticized everyone else's ideas, postponed their duties with a million excuses, but contributed absolutely none of the actual work.
It's infuriating.
Exactly. And in a normal setting, they are just annoying. But in the home without marriage and family, that person is viewed as a literal walking corpse. They're actively harming themselves, harming others and destroying the homeland. They are a tumor that has to be removed.
Which logically leads to how you handle a tumor. You cut it out.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Once you've diagnosed this viral laziness with those 8 features, you have to eradicate it. And the community's countermeasures are completely uncompromising. There is zero tolerance.
None at all.
The text uses a really vivid analogy. One radish, one hole.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the one radish, one hole concept is about creating a perfectly closed system. Think of a highly complex mechanical watch.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Every single gear has a specific placement and a specific job. If one gear decides it wants to take a break and stop spinning, the entire watch doesn't just slow down. The tension causes the whole mechanism to shatter.
Oh, wow.
There's no room, no dark corner, and no gap for a lazy gear to hide in. Everyone must fit perfectly into their role.
Wait, mechanically, how do you even enforce that? Does that mean every single minute of their day is scheduled so there's literally no gap to hide in?
Practically speaking, yes. The structure of their daily life is designed to leave no vacuum, because a vacuum is where laziness breeds. So Zhufeng outlines a severe 8-step protocol, a life-and-death struggle to fight the virus.
What's the first step?
It starts with simple quarantine. Lifechanyuan celestials are denied entry into the utopia in the first place. If they manage to get in and remain impenitent, they are physically evicted.
But physical eviction is almost the easy part, right?
Yeah.
The psychological enforcement is where it gets genuinely intense. The text states that showing pity, sympathy, or tolerance for laziness is considered an actual crime against the home.
Yes, a literal crime.
Let me just pause there. Feeling sorry for someone who is struggling to keep up is a crime.
In this framework, absolutely. Because sympathy for the virus is what allows the virus to spread. Let's relate this to something modern. Have you ever worked in an intense corporate environment, maybe a fast-paced startup where leaving at 5 p.m. was technically allowed by HR, but socially it was treated as a massive betrayal by your team?
Oh, for sure. The toxic hustle culture, where if you aren't grinding until midnight, you aren't a team player.
Exactly. Now multiply that pressure by 1,000, because this isn't just a company, it's a utopian society. If you tolerate the complaining man, if you do his chores for him out of pity, you are validating his victimhood.
You become an enabler.
You are enabling the rot. Therefore, the rules mandate social exile. Lazy people must be actively disdained, and no one is allowed to associate with them. It is complete psychological quarantine before the physical eviction even happens.
And they don't just wait for the symptoms to show up, they actively hunt for them. The community regularly holds studies to psychologically analyze what constitutes lazy thoughts and root them out.
It's proactive.
Yeah, the text says, once there is any incipient tendency, we will get rid of it from our thoughts. It is a constant, proactive mental pruning.
It is exhausting just to think about. But they do balance this severe stick with a very shiny carrot. The community praises, eulogizes, and awards the highest honors to the diligent people. They create a culture where the ultimate social currency is effort.
And these proverbs for that too, right?
Yes, the author uses proverbs to justify this constant state of motion. He writes, running water never becomes putrid, meaning the moment you stop flowing, you stagnate and decay.
Or, another quote he uses, a small leak will ruin a big dam. The idea being that even a tiny amount of laziness, if left unchecked, will eventually compound until the entire beautiful homeland is washed away.
This raises an important question about enforcement, though. You cannot police people this aggressively from the top down without sparking a rebellion.
Right. If someone is just screaming at you to work all day, you're going to snap.
If a dictator forces you to work from dawn to dusk, you will eventually revolt. So how does Yue Feng get people to enthusiastically police themselves and each other?
So what does this all mean? Why implement such uncompromising, strict measures? It all comes down to how the community's structure and ownership are fundamentally defined.
Ownership is key.
Totally. Think of the difference between a hotel guest and a homeowner. A hotel guest might leave wet towels on the floor or leave all the lights on when they go out because, hey, someone else is getting paid to clean it up. It's not their problem.
But the homeowner?
But the actual owner of the house. They turn off the lights, they hang up the towel, they vigorously care for the space because every bit of damage comes directly out of their own pocket. You can't enforce these severe rules if people don't feel they personally own the space.
That is the philosophical engine of the entire project. Xue Feng explicitly warns members against treating the home without marriage and family like a hotel or a private company. He says that if a member regards themselves as a migrant job hunting boy or a public servant, They are making a fatal error in cognition. They are acting like hotel guests in their own utopia.
And crucially, he insists it is a massive mistake to view the home as the personal property of the leadership.
Hmm.
He writes that if the home is regarded as the manor of Shui Fang or the dean, the utopia will fail.
It cannot be his personal kingdom.
Exactly. The text is absolutely adamant that the home belongs equally, 100%, to all Chanyuan celestials.
Which means every single member must act as a master of the home. They have to fulfill the duties and obligations of a master. The author argues that those historical ideal communities, the ones that failed, disappeared under the erosion of laziness, precisely because the people stopped acting like owners.
They reverted to being guests.
They reverted to being guests, they waited for management to fix the problems, and when everyone waits for someone else to do the work, the utopia dies.
Zifeng even brings in the story of Genesis to hammer this point home. He uses the metaphor of Adam and Eve, stating they were forced to leave the Garden of Eden because they didn't know how to treasure it.
That is a heavy comparison.
I love this reinterpretation, though. The implication is that Eden wasn't lost because someone ate a magic apple. Eden was lost because humanity took paradise for granted. They stopped acting like stewards of the garden and started acting like consumers.
It is a profound, if severe, reading of human nature. In this worldview, survival depends entirely on everyone defeating laziness together. The text closes with a very stark binary. Whether we can survive or die depends on whether we can defeat laziness.
It's all on them.
It is not up to Su Feng. It is not up to the universe. It is up to the continuous, grueling effort of every individual recognizing themselves as the master of their own paradise.
It is a fascinating, incredibly intense blueprint for society. Let's briefly recap the journey we've been on today for you all. We've explored a framework where laziness is completely stripped of its innocence and categorized as a societal cancer.
Right.
We saw how abolishing the traditional family redirects all loyalty to the collective, making personal laziness a direct theft from the community. We looked at how this virus progresses from a weary morning routine into a toxic, complaining victim mindset that eats the bread of idleness.
And we also unpacked the mechanisms behind their 8 merciless strategies to quarantine it. From the one radish, one hole, closed system design, to the concept that sympathizing with the slacker is an actual crime, to the proactive psychological pruning required to stop rot before it starts.
And we saw how this all relies entirely on a shared, absolute ownership mindset. The belief that if you don't treat the utopia like you own it, if you act like a hotel guest, the utopia will inevitably die. Which leaves us with a brand new, lingering question to ponder on your own.
And it is the ultimate paradox of this kind of intentional community.
Exactly. If a true utopia requires constant, grueling, life-and-death vigilance against human nature's most basic biological desire for rest, at what point does the exhausting militant effort to maintain the paradise actually destroy the peace of the paradise itself?
It's a great question.
Are you still living in a utopia if you have to fight off demons every single day just to keep the doors open?
That is the tightrope they are choosing to walk.
So tomorrow morning, when that alarm goes off and you reach out a heavy hand to hit that snooze button, just remember, you aren't just getting an extra 9 minutes of sleep.
You might be letting the virus in.
According to Zhu Theng's worldview, you are. You might be leaving a wet towel on the floor of Eden and letting the whole utopia collapse. Keep that in mind before you roll over. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.